vicious, disgusting, vile, villainy. These are words that are commonly used when talking about apostles in the world of Berserk. But there is one apostle in particular that I would hesitate to assign these words to, and that would be Rosine, the little girl who wanted to be an elf, but instead became a monster. The Lost Children chapters are regarded with high praise due to its poignant storytelling. It's possibly one of the most thematically rich parts of the manga, with its dark subject matter involving children. This also means it's one of the sadder parts of the manga, which, for whatever reason, we like that. I think one of the things people like about these chapters is that, in comparison to other sections of the manga, the Lost Children chapters are relatively self-contained. It's like a mini story, making it easy for us to focus on a singular thing and digest it effortlessly. The topics prevalent in the Lost Children chapters are touchy, but important for each of us to recognize, and we will discuss them in greater depth. But before we do that, we need to learn about the central character of discussion for this video, Rosine, whose first appearance predates these chapters. Rosine's first appearance is in chapter 52 during the Golden Age arc. You may recall the moment where Rickert is with a bunch of the Band of the Hawk who are under R&R, and apostles appear and kill nearly everyone present. Well, moments before that, Rickert is fetching water and he sees a sort of magical sparkle upon the river. And just like Rickert, we recognize what it is. An elf. Puck enters Berserk with its first arc, the Black Swordsman arc, giving us a slither of goodness and hope in contrast to the dark world that surrounds him. Guts is the broody, edgy type, and the elf helps balance the scales by playing a character that is almost opposite to Guts. Later in the manga, he even says that without him, this story would be incredibly dark and dull. So when we see a similar looking creature later in the story, we, just like Rickert, assume it's an elf, a creature of good nature. But we can quickly dismiss that assumption as screams fill the air. Rickert returns to the camp and finds the campfires burning idly. Apostles appear from the darkness, revealing why nobody is around. We then come to realize that the thing we thought was an elf was indeed one of them, an apostle. Our expectations subverted. Luckily for Rickert, Skull Knight appears and tells the apostles to basically pack it up. Rosine then makes a mannerism that is childlike and similar to the behaviour of an actual elf, leaving us wondering if there is more to this apostle than meets the eye. But we would have to wait many, many chapters till we see her again. After Guts saves a young girl called Jill from being killed by demons, Puck shows up in front of the girl's face, who shouts "No!" in terror. She's terrified of this friendly guy. She asks if he is an elf from Misty Valley, and similar to Puck, we don't know what she's talking about. But then we are shown the reason why she is so fearful of elves. A bunch of men get surrounded by a swarm of these elves. One says, "This ain't no kid's fairy tale." We once again see the same creature we saw in the Golden Age, who says, "Yes, this is a fairy tale for children." And we can only make assumptions of what happens next, but I can tell you, I don't think it involves reading a fairy tale story. Next, we go to the village where Jill lives, and the site is interesting, for though the town has people living in it, the streets are vacant. Instead, everyone is inside, hiding away from something outside. We then come to learn that the villagers are afraid of elves who commonly terrorize this very place. And so when they see the lone elf that is Puck, they become very hostile, claiming that his kind attacked the villagers. Of course, the villagers gather outside their homes and get their weapons out. Guts has no choice but to defend himself. He then eventually escapes and finds a windmill shed to lay down for the night. Jill, curious about the swordsman, joins later on and falls asleep next to him. When the Black Swordsman wakes, he has many questions, but the one he asks first is about the Misty Valley. Jill says the valley east of the village over the mountains had a mist that constantly hung around it, hence why they called it the Misty Valley. And legend says that elves had lived there for a long time. For years, the village had fields, storehouses, livestock and crops devoured by these mysterious creatures that the people of the village swore were elves. When Puck hears of this account, he is left puzzled as the actions done by these supposed elves do not resemble anything of his kind. For one, they kill humans, and two, they take children away from the village. And speak of the devil, a swarm of these elves are seen above approaching the village. We see Guts' brand bleed, which confirms they're not really elves. There's something else. And by the time Guts reached the village, the creatures had already gone to work, killing a family and their dog along with some livestock. When the surviving child is running away from the ravenous swarm, Guts comes to him, asking the kid if he either wants revenge for his mom and dad or to go with the elves. The kid instinctively chooses the first option, in which Guts uses the kid as a bait for the swarm of elves to follow him to a nearby barn.
Jesus Christ.
Here we see the true nature of these elves as they transform. They looked somewhat similar to Puck before, but now they look anything but. Now looking like hornets and wasps, you know, them insects that literally no one likes. Well, I guarantee someone that's watching this video likes them, so except from you, you special little person.
Yeah, you fucking prick! Fuck you! Fuck!
Guts, now in the position he wanted to get the vermin in, pours gunpowder all over the barn and ignites it through the use of his arm cannon, instantly extinguishing all of the creatures inside. Yeah, you know what? I don't blame him, because when I see even the smallest of spiders in my room, I really start to sympathize with pyromaniacs. After the creatures are gone, the queen of them appears, Rosine, whose appearance looks somewhat similar to that of a butterfly or a moth with its overall look and the patterns on the wings. Rosine is actually impressed with the strength of Guts, considering he is a human. Guts sees right through the gleeful facade that the creature is putting on. It is no elf, but amidst this interaction, Puck notices how the creatures are speaking. There's something off about these creatures, they're too similar to children. As Guts swings Dragon Slayer towards Rosine, he misses as the Queen Elf appears to be quicker and lands a deadly strike on him before Guts has time to counter it. She then begins to gloat, which fuels Guts' rage. Puck, coming to an understanding, pleads with Guts to stop and listen to him because they're not elves, they are children, which makes absolute sense considering their attitude and mannerisms are just like how one would act. Another revelation occurs as Rosine calls Puck Peekaf, a popular folktale from Jill's village. Jill realizes that it's Rosine. Rosine is about to attack Guts once again, but Jill jumps in front of the Black Swordsman, telling Rosine to stop, which, surprisingly, works as she disengages and verbalizes that she remembers Jill, illustrating that some humanity still remains within this apostle. Once Rosine leaves the scene, Guts collapses due to the poisonous sting. The hostile villagers come over towards Jill and Guts, blaring questions at him if he's responsible for the carnage that had just happened. We are then shown a shocking image of what remains of the burning barn. Dead children that belong to the village. We know that once apostles are dead, their physical shell of who they were before they transcended to being an apostle is left behind. This confirms that these horrible creatures were in fact just children. Feeling a sense of panic and tapping into his darker side, Guts thinks quickly and uses Jill as a hostage to escape the town. As the villagers, no doubt, look at Guts as the problem. And once Guts is a fair distance away, he lets Jill go and tells her to buzz off back to the village. But Jill is intrigued by Guts and wants to continue with him towards the Misty Valley, where the big elf who once was Jill's friend is located. Guts is like, yeah, I'm about to go kill that girl. Damn, I forgot how edgy he was. And she's left pondering her circumstance. What I didn't mention before is that Jill lives with an abusive father who is often drunk. We will learn to understand that it goes a bit deeper than this and how alike her life is to her former friend Rosine. Conflicted about returning to her village where she has a good idea of what's likely to happen, she decides to take a gamble and follow the mysterious Dark Warrior. As night comes, Guts knows it's going to be a long night, but he is surprised when he sees the children from the barn come to haunt him. As he fights them, Jill sees a Black Swordsman in a trance of rage. And if you didn't get the message the first time around, yes, they are children, as one of them asks for their mother. To which Guts is like,
Get the fuck out of here!
Jill is unsettled by the scene, so she steps in front of him, which breaks him from this trance he is in. However, they are pushed off the cliff where Guts actually protects Jill from the fall. See, he does have a heart. Guts is like, why in God's name did you follow me? And Jill doesn't respond with an answer, so then Guts asks about Peekaf, in which we are told about a fairy tale. Peekaf was a boy who was bullied by the children of the village for how he looked. To the point he even thought, this isn't my home, these people aren't my real parents, as no one, including his parents, looked like him. Thus, he went to the Misty Valley where he found individuals who looked exactly like him. However, he was rejected as he wasn't a true elf. One informed Peekaf that a man and a woman brought a baby to the forest who was close to death due to illness. Breaking the law of their village by entering, they pleaded to somehow save the child, in which their wish was granted. The baby's life was saved with magic. However, his appearance was altered to half resemble the elves. The parents didn't care, they were just happy their child could live. Peekaf ran off in a great haste, understanding that he had been loved all along. Unfortunately, time acts differently outside the valley, and his parents and the village were long gone. Peekaf had nowhere to go. We find out how this is relevant to Rosine in the following chapter, where we learn some important backstory about her. Jill, who was 4 years younger than Rosine, looked at her like she was a big sister, though she was said to be strange. She liked catching bugs and small animals to show Jill, and liked doing things such as playing in the woods and streams and collecting weird objects, which was viewed as an activity a boy would typically do. One of these objects in particular was an egg-shaped stone, which we already know is a beelet. Reflecting on it now, Jill remembers that they would stay out late till the sun started to set, as Rosine often avoided going home. This is because Rosine lived in an abusive household where she often had bruises on her cheeks and arms. In the past, their village got wrapped up in a big conflict. Many escaped the village, however, some women did not manage to escape in time. One of these was Rosine's mother, who was violated by a soldier. Rosine's father was unsure whether he was the father, and so she had to grow up listening to remarks like, "Is that girl really my daughter?" We can also assume, because of the bruises from Rosine, that the father also got physical with her. This ultimately leads to Rosine making a decision that changes her life forever. On one rainy night, Rosine came to Jill's house, and standing in the pouring rain with an almost crazed look on her face, Rosine announces to Jill that she is leaving home to go to the Misty Valley, the land of elves. It seems that though the fairy tale of Peekaf is just that, a fairy tale, it is as real as anything can be to Rosine. And so she is going to follow in the footsteps of Peekaf, as she thought she was just like the fairy tale character. And she went missing and was never found again, and her parents also vanished soon after. Guts is familiar with the beelet, and he's like, her parents vanished soon after, yeah? Is that right? And lays it down for Jill that basically who your friend was is no more. It is now a demon, and if she steps in front of Guts again, he ain't stopping his sword. So he leaves Jill as he goes hunting for Rosine. However, once Guts leaves, Rosine shows up to Jill, and Jill is frozen in place and doesn't know how to act. And perhaps sensing unease in her friend, Rosine changes her look ever so slightly to resemble a more human-like face, which is what Jill remembers her as. And this interaction is interesting as Rosine, though an apostle, doesn't act like a typical one would. Instead, it's just like how she was when she was a human, giving off this air of youthful innocence, only she looks considerably different. She invites Jill to the Misty Valley, but Jill is conflicted as Guts' words are echoing in her mind. Speaking of Guts, he comes out of the woods like the speed of sound and attempts to strike the elf apostle. This is funny because I'm trying to picture what Guts was doing before this. Did he go into the woods expecting Rosine to show up and he just hit for the right time to come out? Was he like, I'm going to go in these woods, I'm going to hide behind the tree and she's going to show up, and when she shows up, I'm going to charge out of here. Anyways, she flies away with Jill and her face molds back into what it was previously, and Jill is frightened at the sight, pleading for Rosine to stop. But Rosine manages to calm her down by taking her on a flight and wows her by showing her the incredible view of the world below them. She says you can fly all you want if you become one of us. This tells us a couple of things. One is that Rosine seems to have a twisted view of what she is and what she plans on Jill to become, viewing it as a significantly better way to live life. Secondly, it seems she doesn't understand the gravity of her actions, wanting Jill to become just like her. This is perhaps a result of her childlike ignorance that still remains within her, or it could be the dark side she has inside her that is coming forward. It seems blurred, so it could be a mixture of both. As Guts has some fun, Puck, the good-hearted little elf that he is, manages to infiltrate the Misty Valley, where he sees Jill is being given special treatment from the evil elves. When Jill is on her own, Puck comes near her and is like, "We need to get the hell out of here. They're monsters, not elves. Do not listen to them." And Jill is conflicted as Rosine's words are taking effect. She starts buying into the idea of becoming just like Rosine, and starts rationalizing some of the more extreme aspects of what that life entails, claiming that attacking and eating humans is what wolves do, and that maybe that's just what happens when you're not human.
Okay.
But the main reason why this sounds enticing to Jill is because back in the village, things happen that, let's say, are less than desirable. And so she really starts to consider the path of becoming a quote-unquote elf. But that idea is basically fully thrown on its head when she sees a bunch of the elves playing by killing each other. And after seeing this sight, Puck and Jill are stunned and the young girl even throws up at the sight. So they run as far away as possible and the creatures are furious that Jill has declined their gift. The two end up at the emergence grounds where dozens of disgusting cocoons are located, the place where human children are reborn as elves. This is where Rosine appears once more to Jill. Jill doesn't think Rosine's offer is something she can accept, as she thinks it's absurd to live a life where you're killing your friends and doing many other heinous things. But Rosine says it isn't too different from the life she was living anyway, and the best times were when they were outside the village with their imaginations, and if she were to become an elf, she will have everything she's ever imagined. Rosine even says she will make Jill into a special elf, and Jill starts to feel sleepy, as it seems what is happening to her is exactly what Rosine has been doing to others to turn them into these creatures. Jill is about to become exactly like her former friend when something disrupts the event. Of course, it's Guts, and the way he is drawn makes him look like a much worse monster than even Rosine. Jill even comments on the fact that he looks like a terrifying monster, and seeing that Guts is a force to be reckoned with, as he slashes effortlessly through swarms of these vermin. Rosine transforms into her true form. Yes, that indeed was not her true form. With her new transformation, gone is the illusion of an elf. She turns into a more monstrous looking insect, where Jill has trouble comprehending is her friend. And yes, we get another apostle fight with Guts. With each apostle fight, it demonstrates Guts becoming a fiercer and more intelligent warrior. This time he faces an opponent with great speed and the ability to use its poisonous sting for severe damage. And the fight goes as many fights do in Berserk. Guts first gets beat to a pulp where he tries to figure out the Achilles heel of the opponent, one of them being Rosine's attachment to Jill, as he takes the opportunity to impale the apostle when it was focused on Jill, which infuriates Rosine and takes Guts to the air with her and stabs her stinger into Guts' cheek, where we get the iconic panel. But you can kill Guts.
You can't kill me!
And he always gets the upper hand. As a twisted elf falls from the sky, she reminisces about the past, where we learn the full picture. Rosine knew the Misty Valley didn't have elves, but she waited for days on the hope that if elves were indeed real, that at least one would show up to her. But the only thing that showed up was her parents. Her mother was joyed to see her. However, her father punched her in the face upon finding his missing daughter, as he felt humiliated that she ran off. And going for the worst father of the year award, he starts beating her again and he angrily scolds her. Feeling at her lowest, seeing her father also hit her mother, the billet in Rosine's hand activates, where it's very likely she sacrifices her parents. It's in this moment where it makes sense to us. It felt like something was missing when it came to this character. Moments before, we wanted this demented looking bug creature to die, but now, with this final piece of the puzzle, the picture is complete and it is one that is somber. With the now bleeding out Rosine, Puck tells Rosine that elves did really live here in the Misty Valley, but for whatever reason, they vanished. Guts takes the final swing at Rosine, but is hit by an arrow and sees the Holy See approaching. Go away, I already made a video about you lot. In Rosine's final moments, she chooses to take to the sky to return home, and in her childlike mind, she ponders about what is for dinner, with a slight feeling of positivity that she might see her parents again. A moment that is both melancholic yet unsettling, knowing what awaits an apostle once they have died. But in the darkness, there is some hope as we see Jill let go of her dad and abandon the village, which caused nothing but negativity for her. And in a move that displays her maturity and independence, she follows Guts. However, she cannot follow the swordsman in his quest. He puts on the image of being a dark, edgy boy, but his heart does peek through when he senses the desperation in the girl. He is clearly sparing Jill, as he tells her that basically, if you come with me, you will die. She is sad that she cannot join Guts, but she understands the potential danger. So instead, Jill makes a brave move and decides to find her own way, just like Guts once did in the past. This is a refreshing take on apostles and the idea of what makes a person evil. For once, an apostle isn't acting incredibly bloodthirsty and acting like a typical monster would. This is perhaps the first time we see a monster that struggles to fit the definition of being evil. Yeah, we get a slightly sympathetic apostle in the story before this with the Count, when he chooses not to sacrifice his daughter in order to keep living. This, along with the Lost Children chapter's villain, Rosine, shows us that it ain't black and white when it comes to evil. In my video about Wild, I mentioned that most people who become apostles did so out of selfish desire, a weakness in them that lusted for power. The wild backstory that we got wasn't one of sadness unlike Rosine's. Here we see a different side to what it means to sacrifice something. It seems like Rosine was forced into this decision. Yes, it was still a choice she made, she didn't have to make that choice, but what was the alternative for her? And if you were in her shoes, do you really think you would make a different choice? And we know apostles either remain with the same personality they had as a human, or they have an exaggerated version of it. So going back to Wild once again, we can assume from all the details given to us, the fact that he displays some of the worst actions in the whole manga, he was probably not the greatest man around when he was a human. When it comes to Rosine, she still cares about Jill even in her final form, the form where apostles tend to unleash the most terror. When searching around the internet, I found some division in people's opinion on whether Rosine was truly a bad person. Now, you can have any opinion that you want on this matter, but the fact that I found that there is division shows that moral simplicity is absent when it comes to these chapters. And it's not just Rosine that is included in this, because Guts here stretches the definition of what it means to be a hero. That's why you call him a protagonist. The main character doesn't always have to be a goody hero. But what I really think impacts the readers the most in this mini story is the subject matter involving children. Miura explores themes of trauma, loss of innocence, and coping with a turbulent life at a young age in these chapters, showing how greatly our actions can cause a dark trajectory for the life of a child. What we feed children at a young age can impact who they will become when they grow up. Ideas of right and wrong, intellect, mental health, and personal morals are just a few things that are significantly impacted by how people are raised at a young age. So it is a necessity for when we have children in our life to ensure they live in a space that will not negatively impact their life. And with both Rosine and Jill, we see what occurs when this does not happen. One plainly obvious thing was how similar Jill and Rosine's lives were. In some of these panels, it takes me a second to figure out which of these two are shown on screen. My interpretation of this is to illustrate how two people who suffer the same or similar circumstances can go down two completely different paths. An example I like to use to understand this is there's two young brothers that are at the same age, and they have an alcoholic father. One of them learns this behavior and becomes an alcoholic when they are older, whereas the other brother acknowledges the negativity that life holds and never becomes an alcoholic. In the case of Rosine and Jill, Rosine felt as though her escape was to become a monster. Her father was also a monster. Jill, on the other hand, sees the horror of her life through the abuse she suffers and the fate of her friend, and does not give in to the darkness. Instead, she lets go of it and walks into the unknown world that is life with an optimistic attitude. It is very complicated, and psychologists don't fully understand what truly makes two people who experience the same thing have two different ways of dealing with it. And it is not as simple as there being right and wrong paths being the only way it goes. But nevertheless, it's just extremely interesting to me why the human brain can work this way. One thing I noticed about Jill is that she seems to be the emotional anchor for this section of the manga. Everything she feels mirrors the audience, her curiosity about the Misty Valley, her fear at the ravenous creatures masquerading as elves, her sadness for herself and her friend Rosine. We can kind of understand and put ourselves in a position of how it would be to actually cross paths with Guts. And another element I noticed both in my first time experiencing this section of the story and upon rereading is that there seems to be a somewhat romantic feeling between Rosine and Jill. This is most visible after her transformation into the apostle, as she grabs Jill and holds her closely and gives her a kiss, and expressed perhaps slight jealousy over Jill having an interest in Guts. Rosine definitely expresses more of a romantic sentiment than Jill does. However, they are both still young, and a lot of people think their relationship is more like sisters. Jill does quite literally say she looked at Rosine like an older sister. So yeah, these depictions to me as a man look a bit questionable because as a young boy we never interacted like that with each other, but the opposite gender's experience may differ from mine, and I do think in general, it is more common for young girls to show their friends' affection to each other. But this speculation is kinda irrelevant to the story it's trying to tell. These two characters, romantic or not, did hold love for each other, and it's that matters for the character and story. In a world where everything is dark, at least they felt like they had each other. Going back to how abuse can mold someone into who they are, whatever they suffered becomes a part of them. It never truly vanishes, and it's very hard to accept that as humans. Even with less severe trauma in childhood, it is still difficult to deal with as an adult. When it comes to the abuse to which Rosine suffered, it can become catastrophic to who the individual will become. Most bad people who commit awful acts are often victims of these circumstances. Rosine becomes what she is solely because of what her life was. If her life was one of love and affection, I think we can safely say that her life would have ended up differently. But of course, what she experienced led her to make a sacrifice in which she became a monster, and did actions that are unjustifiable no matter which way you spin it, to ultimately end up with her only friend rejecting who and what they became, and dying alone with the hope that the next world is one more forgiven. Unknown to her is the fate that awaits all apostles. This is the tragedy of Rosine. Her childhood was taken away from her, a time in a human's life that symbolizes youth, innocence, purity and potential. All of it snatched away for the one thing that is supposed to unconditionally love you does in fact not. This is why the Lost Children chapters are often regarded as one of the more darker yet somber aspects of Berserk. There's a fair few amount of people that think the Lost Children chapters are more into the filler side. I think the reason for this is because we are fresh off the Golden Age and left with many questions about Griffith and Guts' quest. So the story told here in these chapters stray away from this. So some may think, why does any of this matter? But I think it's important for many reasons. One is that it kind of gives you a break from the main story that had a lot of stuff going on, and so this part feels like a natural rest point. These chapters also serve as a transitioning section into the birthing ceremony chapters where Griffith is reborn. With hindsight, rereading these chapters, it's cool to see the Holy See get introduced here as Guts is dealing with Rosine, for them to end up crossing paths, which flows extremely smoothly into the next conflict Guts has in the story. Well done, Miura. You get a gold star. Another reason for these chapters is to show Guts' current mental state. Revisiting this section of the story, I'm reminded of how much darker Guts was after the eclipse. Of course, this is a return to the Guts we saw at the beginning of the story with the Black Swordsman arc, where he is a walking path of self-destruction. We see his lack of care for Jill, a young child similar to the Count's daughter, even using her as a hostage at one point, and we don't see him interfere when she's getting hit by her father. In fact, he even taunts Jill with it later on. So he's just a child. Chill, Guts. We see him use a child as bait, which is kind of hilarious because of how messed up it really is. He is clearly different from the Guts of the Golden Age arc. In the way he is drawn in some of the panels and through the perspective of Jill, he looks just like a monster, making the showdown between him and Rosine look like a battle between demons. These are some of my favourite panels that Miura has made, because it makes Guts look like a beast of darkness. And in the end, we kind of feel sorry for Rosine, but Guts still tries to kill the defenseless being. This version of Guts, alongside the Black Swordsman arc, which is basically the same, shows Guts at his darkest, and it proves how much he's changed later on in the manga. I don't think Berserk has a more sympathetic, evil character than Rosine. Her life is practically devoid of any joy. The only time was her time spent with Jill. But that being said, I don't agree that she did nothing wrong. Please remember, though the lines are more blurred here than usual, Rosine did kidnap a lot of children, turning them into those horrible wasp-like creatures, as she had a twisted sense of rescuing these kids, depriving them of who they could have become if it wasn't for her actions.
Ironic.
Try not to forget about her first appearance in the story, where we can assume at the very least, she aided in the killing of the Band of the Hawk. And she would have 100% killed Guts too if he hadn't have got the upper hand. Yet again, Miura reminded us that Berserk and his characters aren't coloured with black and white. These chapters for me are some of the most depressing in Berserk, and although I appreciate the themes that are conveyed, I don't really enjoy rereading them because of how down and dark they tend to be. There isn't much joy to be found, but what I will say is that I really appreciate that Kentaro ended this story on high spirits. And as dark as the Berserk story is, Miura does actually put a lot of hope in the story despite what you may think. And I think it's that exact reason for why this story resonates so much with us. Because when you're in the darkness, if you search for it, there will be a light.
Please clap.